Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Well, welcome back to more Live from the Heartland for the week of July 29th. And it always brings me great pleasure to bring on an old friend, someone I've worked with and really greatly admire, the one and only Marilyn Katz of MK Communications. She's an organizer, she's a political strategist. She is something else. And we've been dancing around trying to get her on to talk about Israel. And the stuff in Israel just keeps unfolding. I'd like to share at the start that I grew up in a town that was pretty progressive. It was an upper middle class town in Connecticut, Westport. And there were a lot of very progressive Jewish people in my town. I grew up, liking Israel. I read Exodus. But over the years, as a political hombre, my support for Israel has really dissipated greatly. And I'm really sad about some of the situations that people over there, particularly the Palestinians, are dealing with. As we bring Marilyn on, I would like to just read from the Israeli Declaration of Independence. Quote, the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Marilyn, you sent that to me, and you had a HMMMM after it. Take it away. What do we make of all this?
Well, so when I was a small child, I went to a Jewish school, and I was taught by Sabras, those people who had been raised in Israel, and they were all progressive socialists. So I grew up by the time of 3 to 8, viewing Israel as a positive, in fact, in the sanctuary of the temple on the ceiling still today is written, all created equal. So that formed a sense of Jewish values that I thought went back hundreds of years to fight for socialism. And there was a real division, I've learned later, between the progressive socialists who founded the country and worked the kibbutzim and folks who were more right-wing, like in the Irgun, who were terrorists, essentially, who terrorized the Palestinians. And then by 1967, Michael, right after I met you, it was clear the game was over, that Israel had become a bellicose state. My Jewish relatives would say things like, the only good Palestinian is a dead Palestinian. And so even by then, it was clear that Israel had transformed itself from a haven into a colonizer state. And the folks that they colonized were the Palestinians. So I personally stayed away from Israel and the issue for decades. And the first time I went to Israel was in 2000, when it looked like there might be an accommodation between an independent Palestinian state and an independent Israel, mutually respectful. But even then, it was clear that Arabs and also Black Jews from Ethiopia were very unequal in Israel proper. However, that's when the Prime Minister stepped on the Temple Mount on a Friday and created an uprising, which became the Second Intifada, which was the pretext that Israel used to take what is now 68% of the land in the West Bank and control all of it, which is startling. So if you went back today, which I've gone pretty much every year until 2019 to the pandemic, you would see the Israelis having used the pretext of the Second Intifada to totally wall off the individual villages within the West Bank. It almost looks like a muffin tin. So in order to say, for example, to take a trip that would normally take 5 minutes between Lincoln Park and Lakeview, it would take an hour and a half by the time you went away, all the way around the walls. So in the last 20 years, what has happened and what has allowed what happened, well, let's talk about what happened last week and then go back.
Yeah, let me just share that, what really hit home for me was when my mom went to Israel with a church group. And when she came back, and she really loves everybody, she says, Mike, they don't treat those Palestinians very well. And it's clear that we have a lot of Palestinians in refugee camp in Jenin, which was recently attacked. We have big demonstrations in the streets over people not wanting them to limit the powers of the Israeli Supreme Court. It's just ongoing. So give us a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a lot more, but so why now? Why this? So last week, and these things go together, it is true that the Netanyahu government has proposed limiting the ability of the Supreme Court to act on laws that it passes, and makes it the Supreme Court to be appointed by the party in power for that moment. So it would be like, Trump would get to appoint the entire Supreme Court. So there are two things about it. While a lot of the Israeli protest has focused on, religious rights and gay rights and trans, the real objective here is to allow, in my opinion, to allow Israel to totally annex the West Bank and make sure that any law that, right now, if you're a Palestinian, you can't get a building permit. If you're a Palestinian, there are 120 different rules to get a pass into Israel. If you're a Palestinian, you cannot go from your town to the sea if you live in the West Bank. And you have no right to challenge the taking of your lands. So at the moment, as bad as that is, it would be worse because you would have no independent Supreme Court even to appeal to. So many of us who've been really dealing with this issue, while we are very sympathetic to the civil liberties of our sisters and brothers who are Israeli Jews, are really looking at the issue of occupation, and that this move on the Supreme Court is part of fulfilling what a section of the Jewish community has wanted from the beginning. It's not just Netanyahu, which is the total removal of Palestinians from the West Bank. And not by, in 1948, between 750,000 and 1 million fled. Right now, the tactic has been to make living on the West Bank impossible. No water systems, disconnected from the grid. No building permits, no ability to move freely, not only between the West Bank and Israel, but between one village and another. The inability to go to school, the inability to easily get an education. The message is clear. It's better if you leave.
Marilyn, let me jump in and ask you, what's the situation for Palestinians who live in Israel? And I understand there's about 1/3 of the Israeli population is non-Jewish, to be Palestinian mostly. What's that situation?
It's a second and third class citizenry. Last year, they made Hebrew the official language of Israel and took down many of the dual signages. When getting permits to build housing has the same kind of challenges that the West Bank has. Thirdly, you don't have rights. If I'm a Palestinian, if I'm an Arab Israeli, and I go to marry someone from Jordan or the West Bank, I can no longer live within Israel. The schools are less funded. The Arab towns are in shambles. The streets, it is worse than Black towns in the United States in terms of resources, in terms of equitable funding, in terms of rights.
I'm wondering what people can actually do. I know that there's an issue that brings it back to Illinois, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I got some news today. You might have been one of the things you sent me, but it said Biden is weighing a big Middle East deal. And, you know, he's talking about trying to do some kind of a peace deal with Saudi Arabia to open up recognition of Israel by a number of Muslim-dominant countries, as long as the Palestinians were treated fairly in this arrangement. What do you know about this big Middle East deal that Biden is looking at?
You know, I read it on the same, that's why I sent it to you from Tom Friedman. I had not known about it. I think that is a potential, but let's be real. We are a year away from elections, and the Jewish vote has been 75% of all Jews vote Democratic. You should know that. And they don't really vote on Israel. They really vote on all the progressive things for which Jews tend to fight, you know, women's rights, abortion rights, blah, 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 civil rights. That said, I don't know. I mean, it's clear that Biden has not been able to, even though he's been pushed by the progressive Jewish organizations, and there are many, J Street, APN, the Progressive Jewish Network, he has not been bold. In fact, it's really interesting to me that the person who has been boldest is Nicholas Kristof. Nicholas Kristof proposed this week that funding for Israel be predicated on the promise by Israel not to expand the settlement. Bernie Sanders today came out with the same. I don't think it goes far enough. I mean, I think the Jewish community should take the lead in asking for retrenchment. I mean, here's how I think about it, Mike. You and I became very politically active over civil rights and the war in Vietnam. And I consider the Palestinians today as Vietnamese. If, in fact, it had not been for the Holocaust, all of us would have been fighting for anti-colonial liberation of the Palestinian people. And, you know, and that's what I think we have to do today. So I think we do need to pressure the feds to deny aid unless there's a retrenchment and a commitment not to. I mean, it may not work, but it's got to be the demand. And secondly, on a local level, we should use an anti-BDS fight to educate people, as we did in South Africa, on the apartheid within Israel property and the colonization in the West Bank and Gaza. I'm game. You know, nothing like a good fight. And this is a good one.
Let me ask you, I know that there is an Illinois law that I want to address as we go out, but we have a few minutes left. And I'm wondering, you know, I live up here in the 49th Ward, and it used to be, you know, Irish Catholic and Jewish predominantly, and both of them, not so much anymore, but a little west of here, you know, I see all kind of Orthodox Jews on the street. And I'm wondering, and I see signs that, you know, synagogues support Israel. I'm wondering what is in the States, and particularly here in Chicago, is there a split in the Jewish community, liberal and then conservative? Where's that all at?
So if you took the city and the suburbs, you would say that in terms of membership, AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and it's a right wing, is bigger in terms of membership, paid membership. But I would say that in terms of voting and in terms of action, actually the majority of the Jewish community is unaligned and critical of Israel. Now, the
Go ahead.
West Side crowd, forget it. I mean, they're a thing to themselves. You know, they're very religious, they're very kosher, they're very orthodox, and they keep to themselves. And they're never, it would be unlikely that they would ever kind of critique Israel at all.
You know, there's a law in Illinois passed by the General Assembly here, and we're really a blue state, a progressive state compared to most others. In 2015, the Illinois General Assembly passed a law making it illegal for the state to do business with any company that refuses to do business in the occupied West Bank. And that would include Ben & Jerry's, who were a target of the lawmakers, because they basically sell ice cream in Israel, but wouldn't sell it in the, in the occupied West Bank. There's an Illinois anti-boycott law that hinders protests of Palestinians' oppression. And, we want to protest. We want to demand justice. What do you had a piece in the Tribune, I believe, an op-ed piece recently.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what we can do to try to change this law. I'm going to right away talk to my state rep and my state senator.
It's a really interesting question. So I tried this 2 years ago when I first learned it, when Ben & Jerry's came up. And frankly, Mike, everybody, including all the so-called progressives, were afraid of the issue. So my feeling is, and I'd love to hear from people, that Jews and other progressives have to take the lead, make it comfortable for our less than intrepid elected officials to stand up. And I'm talking about the ones who consider themselves the most progressive. This is not, it cannot be left to Abdel Nasser Rashid to fight this fight. This is a Jewish fight. We created the situation. We need to solve it. So I am looking, hopefully we'll get the cooperation of both J Street and Americans for Peace Now and a bunch of progressive rabbis to begin to wage a campaign this fall that goes at the removal of this law. And so I'm very eager to hear from people.
Well, let's keep pushing this issue. You and I need to be talking to each other more. And I'm going to have you back on the show with more news about Israel or anything you care to discuss, Marilyn.
There's always stuff I want to discuss.
Yeah, I'm sure you're full of ideas. And if we weren't running out of time here on this week's Live from the Heartland, we'd talk more. But we're going to leave it at that. But give you
I'll be back.
Go give 1 minute about what you want people to be doing.
So I want everybody to read what's happened in the last weeks in Israel. And then I want everyone to contact both their state rep and senator, but also their alderperson. Because what I was able to stop 2 years ago was a similar resolution in the Chicago Human Rights Council. So make the difference. We can make the difference. So either write me at mkatz@mkcpr.com, call Michael, but most important, let me know what you need for information so you can call your state rep, your state senator, and don't let them get away with it. We cannot privilege Jewish voters in the state over Palestinian or Jordanian or any other ones. So thank you.
Last week we did have Michael Deutsch on, and one of the things he's talking about is a Palestinian who was having issues with citizenship, et cetera. And that would be like all of the Heartland stuff. It's at youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos.